Hey, welcome to Product Management Insights, where we dive into the strategies and innovations that are shaping the SaaS industry from the perspective of a product leader. I'm your host, Chuck Aiken. Today, we're joined by Chris Mele, managing partner at Software Pricing Partners and a veteran in B2B SaaS monetization pricing strategies. So Chris has been doing this for over 2 decades, and he has revolutionized how companies approach pricing, turning it in from an afterthought into a core element of the product design. His innovative work on usage-based pricing and financial overlays, help build, transform, extend revenue models for startups and tech giants alike. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me. I probably need to do a little bit of a description there. So I have been in the software industry for a long time. I've actually only been here for 10 years. Prior to that, I was actually a customer of Software Pricing Partners. So that's how I first learned about monetization.
That's pricing. A great story. So tell me, take us back.
Only after moment. I lost a lot of money did I finally realize maybe I should hire somebody for help with pricing. And that's actually true of a lot of the team members here. They're former clients. We don't hire from an active client, but sometimes when an executive leaves and wants a career change, we embark on bringing them back.
Right. So what was that moment like when you went from a client to joining the organization?
Well, so there were 2 moments, Chuck. The first moment was through the market crash, we were trying to figure out how to always build a sexier product, right? Because it was just all about product market fit. And it wouldn't be until many years later when I realized it's actually more about product market profitability fit. And that's the point that the product managers need to extend into. It's that third dimension of profitability. And that's where pricing comes into play. But I didn't know any of that at the time. So my answer was always just, we need to build more product. And that was kind of going to be the solution to everything. It was only until that failed and selling through a market crash, which there's been several of them, that I realized there were other variables at play. And so really, as we transitioned from on-prem to the cloud, this was right around 2008. So it was right before the market crash. We were going to use that time to rebuild 10 plus years of tech. And one of the investors that we had said, hey, why don't we reach out for help? Because if we start charging for this on a subscription basis, like our revenue model is going to completely change. And I was actually irritated. Like, I didn't even know there were firms that did pricing. I didn't even know it was a discipline. I thought it was an attribute you hung on the product. And I was a product guy at the time. I have a computer science degree. It was all about a beautiful product that solved a really important need or set of needs. And so then when I embarked on selecting vendors, we talked to Deloitte, we talked to McKinsey, we talked to all the big guys. And then along came Software Pricing Partners. And I was floored to learn about pricing from the inside out. This started in 82. It became a discipline, and it's been around for, now 40 plus years. And everything that they talked to me about was the opposite of pricing planes, trains, and automobiles. It's pricing an idea. And it turns out that you need very different frameworks, very different processes to come down to the idea of what is a product that you can't touch worth, and what is a product that is always changing and increasing in value worth, and how do you handle that? And so after we spent years learning that discipline, after our engagement with Software Pricing Partners, I exited that software company in 2013. I always say that I had the most successful exit of them all because I married our head of marketing, and I have 2 beautiful children, and it's a fantastic life, and I love that part of the journey. When I then decided to do a career change, I came over here. I was not our managing partner on day one. And the first year, I remember telling my wife, she said, well, what do you think? I said, I don't like, they're talking about things that I don't like, what they're using terms and terminology. Everything was new, right? I mean, I had the experience of rolling out the new pricing, but I didn't have the guts under the hood. And some of the modeling techniques and things we were using were just kind of like, oh God, I'm going to have to go back to school or something. Like, this is a lot. And after the years, you start to see the patterns and come on board. So at the time, it was a very questionable switch in career. And I think the first couple of years, I kind of thought I'd done something pretty crazy. And then only until later did I realize this is actually a really complicated and neat space. I get to meet fantastic founders, really talented folks. I'm at the forefront of the AI and healthcare and all these industries where everybody's, coming out with these crazy, ridiculously slick ideas that, their version of changing the world. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
That's quite a story. Thinking about the fact that you had years and years of experience building a beautiful product, and that as you made the shift, just sounds like deer in the headlights, learning new vernacular, new models, new frameworks. And you're saying it took years before you felt like you could somewhat master the craft of pricing. That sounds daunting if I'm a product guy and I'm about to go down this journey myself. Like, wow, transformational to think about how to price something could be just as complicated as building the product itself. Where do you start somebody who might be at the beginning of that journey, of that understanding, that always just viewed price as something that, okay, you slap some numbers up on a landing page, good, better, best. Where do you start, even the founders and the leaders in that conversation and understanding the frameworks? Where do you start?
You do rewind them to the beginning. So it's common that somebody would call up and say, look, I've got a straw man and I think it's like 99% of the way there. And I just need to sit somebody in a room where I can suck their brains and just kind of validate, that we got it right. And that's the telltale sign that we need to start over, because arguably what has happened is they've gone outside in. They've looked out at the market, at the competitors, which from this side of the table is pretty comical, because I know that those founders make it up because they're engineers, and typically what they make up is really very, very accurate, which is code for almost impossible to sell. And that's that friction point between, how we create pricing homegrown and then how we expect somebody to sell on a dysfunctional monetization strategy. And so you rewind them to the beginning. But one of the things that we do here, which is fundamentally different, is we don't black box the process, because if we don't teach you how to fish, if the product's always changing, entropy is guaranteed to set in. And in fact, in software companies, at the rate of product development and the sprint cycles and all the stuff that they're going through, 4 to 6 months, you're going to be out of sync. You're going to have enough stuff coming off the roadmap, maybe even the seed of a new product or something. And you're going to end up in a little bit of a pickle, because maybe you did your pricing 6 months ago and now it needs to be updated in some way, but you don't know. And if you hired somebody that gave you an answer embedded in a 200-page PowerPoint deck, you don't really understand how the cake was made. And in fact, you're going to pour a bunch of ketchup in it and wonder why it tastes really bad. So we're going to rewind to the beginning. And one of the places that you have to rewind to is you have to say, okay, there's more going on than just the price point. There's actually 3 very distinct problems that have to be solved. And they take 3 very different frameworks, very different thought processes, and very different tools to come at them. So for example, the first one is what we call licensing. What is in the licensing model? And I don't mean how are you going to legally license, although there is a connective tissue to the decisions that we make to how they'll be expressed in a contract. But licensing just says what goes in the quantity field. And if you're a really big company and you have multiple products, you probably have multiple things that you're counting. It's users over here, plus storage over there, plus we can go to product number 3, we're going to charge you based on API calls, plus in product number 4, we read this great article about usage-based price. So we're going to charge you based on the number of appointments that you set. And no one ever really sits back and says, but if I want to buy all 4 of those products, how in the hell am I going to estimate all of this stuff, especially if I'm a larger buyer? It turns out that's actually impossible. And that's just code again for we really failed to give the salespeople something that they can actually take through a sales process in a reasonable sales cycle time. Otherwise, we're just going to be extending it. And if I, as a buyer, perceive a risk that I might misestimate, well, then we're really unraveling the transaction very, very quickly, actually, in fact. And so when we think about licensing, it's just, well, less is more. Like, can we find just one ring to rule them all? Like, what's the one thing that we can count? And I think this is the start of, we'll get to the other 2 problems here in a second, but this is the start of where complexity seeps in and where people really misunderstand pricing. And if you think about pricing as the glue that sits between product management and sales, you can kind of think of it that way. It's kind of that missing ingredient that is that connective tissue. If you were to come up with a model that is super easy to sell, then what we really want to do is we want to come up with one thing to count that best expresses that model. But to do that, we have to sacrifice accuracy to create simplicity. But if we sacrifice counting all those things, we might lose revenue, right? So we don't want to like lose the revenue from the storage. So if we say, well, we're not going to count storage anymore, then we better make sure our costs are accounted for. We better make sure that revenue is accounted for, and that revenue has to appear somewhere else in the new strategy in a simple enough way. So put another way, the job of monetization is to do the exact opposite of what marketing does, where they segment. We want to go the other way. We want to not segment. If we segment everything, you'll see those commercial models. You just go out onto the web to many publicly traded companies, and like every feature is metered. 5 of these, 10 of these, 12 of those. If you upgrade and you have 20 of those, 15 of those, 17 of those, that's impossible to sell, and your partner channel is going to hate you. So you want to go the other way. You have to create simplicity. So it's that over-gearing mentality that you're trying to get out of. And that's that engineering mindset. The second problem that you have to solve for is, what is the best expression of the capabilities that you're going to offer that deliver the value? So when I say capability, I don't just mean product. So one of the first bridges you have to cross with product management is to say, we're monetizing intellectual property, and intellectual property comes in many different forms. One of the forms that it comes in is a product feature. It was instantiated or created inside of a product. The other place that it comes from, which sometimes eclipses the product, especially early on, the capabilities inside the product, services. Services are a wonderful test bed of new product. They're also a wonderful encapsulated area of some serious know-how. If you have an enterprise system, especially, and in order to deploy that, you have kind of a time to value window. But what's really happening is you're changing business processes. I'm teaching you how to bill better, for example. I'm teaching you how to kind of reconstruct that workflow. There's a huge amount of value in me torquing your workflow to become more efficient, but that's rarely captured except inside of a crappy hourly rate, on a professional services or something. And so looking at intellectual property is really important. And then there's actually a third bucket that's often ignored, and that's insights. I've analyzed a bunch of customer environments, and I've determined that if you do things this way, it's better, and here's why. And that insight can fuel things like an insight engine and other things that wrap around software. So the offering model, if you go outside in, you'll read tons of blog articles. Oh, you should have 3 versions. Well, what happens when you don't have enough features to differentiate between 3? I mean, we launched our cloud edition with 2 versions, and it turns out that that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So you really want to go inside out. And you'll hear this a lot from me. It's not outside in. You don't want to copy from the crap out there because nobody knows what they're doing. You want to go also inside out. And we can talk more about that. And then the third area is pricing, which just says, if I've done my homework correctly, the expression inside what we call the offering model, some people call packaging, but the expression of my capabilities, products and services, maybe it's platform and apps, maybe it's modular, maybe it's a good, better, best, maybe it's a good and a better, maybe it's an all-in-one, or maybe you have an all-in-one and it needs to be, maybe you think it's one product, but it's 3 products. Like, we don't show up to the party and tell you there's this best practice. And by the way, there are no best practices in pricing. We don't even have benchmarks in pricing. So there can be no best practices if we don't even have benchmarks on what the best pricing models are out there. All we have is what everybody else is doing externally, right? And so there are best practices, but just know those are best practices from the opinion and perspective of service providers like us, right? But there's no universal, right? Everybody's sort of making up new stuff on a daily basis. And all you have to do is visit LinkedIn and see that. So then the third bucket is pricing. What is the right price point? And the job of the pricing model is to produce a reasonable, rational net price for everything that you sell, whether it's one quantity or a gazillion quantities. And we call that a scheduled net price. And a scheduled net price says, I know where I should sell everything that I offer. And now I can measure how closely people get to that marker in the sand. And that's when we really start playing baseball and having what I would consider a bridge you have to cross before you get to the future state of being able to charge for your value. You can never charge for your value if buyers show up and know that the audience has gotten an array of discounts for the same thing that they're buying. If you knew you could buy an iPhone 16 for $200 from store number 742, guess where we're all going to buy our next iPhone? And of course, that doesn't exist anywhere. So you're not going to get that. So because they defend the price, they know how to defend the price, right? Mm-hmm. Because they just don't discount.
So the label that you used,
scheduled
net pricing. If I understand what you're saying correctly, once you identify that, you may not be getting your scheduled net pricing. However, that becomes the goal.
That's right. And that's right. So, and by the way, the reason that exists is because, and I have heard this argument a lot. And the argument, and you'll see actually, there's a great story that Salesforce just came out with pricing for agent force. I was just in a conversation with this the other day. People were describing it as outcome-based pricing and all these descriptors that I don't even know what any of this stuff means. And I'm in the world of pricing. I mean, everybody's defining it differently, which is part of the problem. But it's $2 a conversation, period. So that's just me not charging you for tokens. If I do per 1,000 token-based pricing, I ask you a question, you spit it back, and then we do this a couple times. We exchange a bunch of tokens. Salesforce says just saying it's $2 a conversation flat. That's not outcome-based pricing. That's just charging for tokens, but we're just saying we're counting conversations as a surrogate of the token count. So that pricing mechanism is designed. By the way, it's flat regardless of volume, and this is going to be a big problem, I think, and I think some of that has to do with cost dynamics. But the scheduled net price, the reason that a scheduled net price exists is because there are outliers in every business model. You're in SMB, and all of a sudden you attract Google or something like that. They're buying 10 times the amount of software that a normal customer would. And they expect and understand that you have economies of scale. I mean, everybody knows SaaS companies, 80% gross margin. I mean, they're very profitable, et cetera. So, but there's another reason that they expect that. And that is because as you deploy more software into an organization, there's really nothing more valuable than that first tranche in general. So for me, in a modular ERP-like system that was my software company, we would get the sales and purchasing staff onto our system, CRM, purchasing, receiving, shipping, all that stuff. And then we'd get some owners on top of that were looking at the numbers and the reports. And then later, plus 60 days, we would get you the scheduling module and try to sell you that. And when you bought the scheduling module, let's say the list price was $250 a user back then, this is a long time ago, the first thing that would happen is somebody would say, Chuck, I understand that it's $250 a user flat, no scheduled net price, just here's the list price, right? But like they're only using the scheduling module. Like they're using 20% of the software. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because your audience of users, as you deploy more deeply into your target client, your target customer as a software company, is by very essence, deriving partial value. Now, all of a sudden, the person logs in once a week instead of every day. Now, all of a sudden, the next person views reports. They're not even entering transactions into the system. And the list goes on and on and on. And if you don't model that, if you don't put that into this is, by the way, where a lot of pricing models fall down, because now the salesperson is going to get hit with, have you ever heard this? Well, sales discounts 90+%. Well, I'm not so sure. Okay. So if the model at Salesforce is $2 a conversation and a buyer shows up and says, look, I love it, but I have a whole bunch of conversations that are resolved in like 2,000 tokens. So I'm not paying $2 for those. And a negotiation ensues when the seller does the volume calculation at $2 a conversation, and let's say sells to IBM, and they say, oh yeah, this is going to be great. It's going to be 38 million a month. The IBM of the world is going to say, yeah, that's not going to happen. So the salesperson first has to say, okay, I'm not going to get laughed out of the room. Let me take the 38 million in list, because we're missing a scheduled net price. Let me take the 38 million in list and lower it to 6 million. And then let me go ahead and have a conversation with you and enter the sales process. And then that 6 million is going to become a closed deal, let's say at 4 million. Well, closing a deal of 4 million over 6 million is a very different discount than closing a deal of 4 million over 36 or whatever million I started with. And that's the idea. So I would argue that most software companies today, most like a really large majority, have a fundamental misunderstanding of the true nature of the discounts, because what's really happening is the salesperson is right sizing the deal for volume and crafting their own scheduled net price. And then from there, there's actually a landed deal with a discount. And so all the data is skewed. And of course, we have technology that helps unskew that. And that's part of the game, is to understand, well, what is happening here? And what's happening here is value is a curve. Everything in nature is more organic, and it is not a linear straight line. It never has been, it never will be, because of the nature of which software is deployed.
Okay. So if I'm following along as a student of your framework, there's two things that I want to do. First is simplicity and clarity, but it also sounds like that I should anticipate the pressure the pricing model is going to get, not only because of volume, but other situations. And really my job as a product leader or CEO would be to think about this in advance and model it and understand it, so that I'm not at the mercy of a quick decision in a meeting to close a deal. Is kind of what I'm hearing, is to think through this and think about it proactively and build it into into your product.
Well, now you're playing baseball, because this is a product design issue. Monetization, and I'm using a capital M, not the act of billing, but just what we call software monetization is the designing of the licensing, the offering, and the pricing model. And together we call that a monetization model. So that monetization model, this is a product development lifecycle item, and you should be making these decisions before you put the pizza under the door and get the code back. And it's very important that you do that, because what you're really shooting for, Chuck, is you want to have a typical roadmap that right now, I think 9 times out of 10 is prioritized based on which customer yelled the loudest and the most recently, right? And some are, I'm being facetious, because some are much better managed than that, but they're all sharing a common gap. And the common gap is the monetization potential of what it is that we're building. And I promise you, and I've seen this in our clients over and over, because we help them calculate this, if you get to the promised land where you're designing the product around its packaging and pricing, and then you're saying, well, look, if we build this module over here, here's who would buy it, here's how we would charge for it. This is similar to this other thing that we built. Sound familiar? Agile pricing kind of concepts. This is similar to this other thing that we built, and we were able to extract 20% more net price on top of that deal configuration. So I think this one could start in a similar manner. And therefore, if we did that, we're not going to change our packaging, or we are going to change our packaging, and oops, we're up against this constraint, so let's not do it that way, because our billing system won't support it, or it will support it. If we knew all that, and we knew now that the roadmap has 5 things to build, and number 5 on the list is actually the highest revenue potential, we might take number 5 on the list and put it at the number 1 position. So you're prioritizing the roadmap based on its ability to command value in the marketplace. And that's really where you want to be. It doesn't mean you would always drive everything by revenue alone, but that added dimension is so very important for the health of the software business model, which has to weather a lot of storms like we've just seen through 2022. And I know a lot of software companies that wish that they had, built things in a different order.
Yeah. Well, whether or not you prioritize, or how you prioritize with revenue as a metric, I think you're hitting upon something that I see a lot, which is that pricing and monetization is often a last step. It's put in the last mile. It's I'm ready to ship now. What do I want to charge for it? Or how do I change my pricing? Right. And then all of a sudden, I mean, I've seen it send projects back to the dev team because they didn't have that figured out. More, and I say that where I'm seeing it happen more today is as AI features roll out, and the tokens weren't considered, and then the CFO gets involved and says, "Hey, we have a new cost now. What's the offset?" And they waited until the last minute to talk about a usage-based feature that they've never thought about before because of the cost of tokens, particularly in large enterprise. And that sounds like what's happening with Agentforce is they weren't sure necessarily how to. They came up with an innovative way to handle what they view as the cost of tokens to generate the conversation. So that's why I think it's become more prevalent that people wait, or that they've run into more roadblocks just in one spot. But you said that we would talk a lot about inside versus outside, and let's talk about outside first, because sometimes it's easier to talk about what not to do and then move into okay, now let's talk about what we should do. So real quickly, without rushing through it, a lot of people, when they go outside, they talk to current customers in the pipeline and prospects, and right. How should that be viewed when you go to markets? You mentioned competitors, don't just copy competitors because they didn't know what they're doing anyway. But then most people go, oh, I'm going to talk to prospects and clients because surely they know what this is worth to them. Surely they know what they're willing to pay. Surely, if I talk to 100 people, I can figure out the right price point. Is that accurate? Is that flawed? Like what happens when I go outside and think other people can price my software?
Well, there's a couple things to unravel here. So the first is that I think it was the former chief economist of Google that said, you really don't know what you're willing to pay for the Wall Street Journal that morning until you read it, right? And I think software is an experienced good. We know this. You really don't know how many workflows you're going to embed it into. You tend to show if you knew that I had 100 workflows that you could help me with your software, but I'm showing up to the party with 5 or 10. I'm just thinking about those 5 or 10. Now you see the other 90 to 95, but I don't, right? Because I haven't experienced it yet. I don't know how it's going to change my workflows, and I don't know all the places I'm going to embed it in, and I certainly don't know how deeply I'm going to deploy it. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, UNC, Keenan Flagler, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, talk to any pricing experts outside of software. There is zero science to support the idea that there is any accuracy whatsoever in me asking you, well, what's the most that you'd pay, Chuck, for my AI engine? And what's the least that you'd pay? It's totally a ridiculous concept. I think it was popularized in blogs and some service providers. There's no data whatsoever, no study, no science, nothing vetted to support that. In fact, if you look at the literature and read it, it's like warning, cautionary tales all the way down to the PSM, price sensitivity meter. It's hokey stuff, doesn't work. And the error rates are atrocious. So people don't understand what they're willing to pay for software until they experience it. That's just a fact. And this combines now with the second insight, which is, I haven't been here for 40 years, or it's 44 years now, but I can go back through the project archives and I can look at the past 10 years and tell you from customer research and talking to customers, they don't know. And when you're asked about the question and you are a customer, think about what goes through your head. The first sign that happens when we vet a metric with a customer, you know what they say? They'll say that metric sounds, so if you're charging me based on a site, or you're charging me based on a location, let's just make up something. And then I say, hey, would you be open to me, charging based on the number of patients that go through the facility? The very first thing that goes through the buyer's mind, oh crap, my bill's going to rise. And so the answer is no, that would be terrible. So if you don't understand how to vet that through a conversation with just something simple like, look, just assume same price, right? Exactly the same price. Your bill doesn't change 1 penny. Would you feel more comfortable this way or that way? You have to have you can't do this in a survey. You have to have very savvy conversations in order to just, like, we wouldn't dream of asking you if the price point was fair on a conversation because we know it's totally skewed. And so when you look at the customer research, customers are negatively interested in paying you for your value. In fact, all the way up through the 80s, 90s, and 2000, if you used the term on a call, well, as a salesperson, I just want to make sure we get paid fairly for our value. Just that phrase was so irritating to the ears of a buyer, like they just couldn't stand it. And so you as a customer typically are not interested in paying for the value. What you're interested in, and this is why customers sitting at the center of the universe in the concentric circle, the customer is everything, is a really inappropriate construct in pricing, because customers want to pay you under your cost. They want to pay you under your cost, just slightly under your cost, provided that you will always answer the phone and support their investment. Other than that, game on. They have zero interest in you making a profit. They're not interested in it. And then on top of that, because companies don't have a scheduled net price, the audience of buyers has already learned a deal can be had. So in some ecosystems, buyers buy at the end of the quarter. In really dysfunctional ones, they buy at the end of the year. And in really super dysfunctional ones, the salespeople are jamming deals into finance at 2 a.m. in the hopes that they'll get approved for, making their numbers that year. And those are all real stories that software companies have lived through. And it just is part of the problem that when you show up to buy software as a RFP group or any sort of buyer, this is their words, not mine. They believe it's like worse than buying a used car. And buying a used car is a pretty crappy experience. So imagine what you show up to the party, what the salesperson has to deal with showing up to the party when negotiations have scattered net prices for what they're about to sell. 20% discount, 80% discount, and now we're in a transaction. You want to talk about not being able to defend price, just equip buyers with the lack of uniformity in the prices out in the marketplace. That's just death to the salesperson.
So that's a little bit of insights into what you can't do, which is ask the customer. Now, as we come inside the team, and
by the way, you can still ask the customer not about that, but you can glean by asking them the ways in which they have used the software to solve the problem. And this is where maybe it's a little worthwhile to talk about this phrase, usage-based pricing, which I cannot stand. I don't know who coined this phrase, but it's a real misnomer. You are not charging for the usage of the software. There's no such thing as usage. If you charge for the usage of the software, we would just all charge based on the time you've been logged into the software. And of course, nobody would ever pay on that basis, right? You're trying to capture the value from the use of the software. And if you just think about that little subtle twist right there, what that means is the buyer, the customer, the user has to use the software, derive value, take that value, time savings, revenue, return it back to the organization to some workflow. That's what you're monetizing. And I think once you start thinking about that, we won't see all this silliness of per conversation pricing and all these other things that people are trying to do under this misnomer of usage-based pricing. But sorry, I interrupted, Chuck.
No. So if I understand that right, as we're thinking about how we could get true insights from customers, clients, or maybe even prospects that are on a free trial, what I hear there is that watch how they use the software, what features they spend time with, even if it's only 20% of the software, that's where they're deriving value. Now, I don't know does that mean that then I would start thinking about that being the tilt for pricing? Don't know.
No, because you have to go one step further. You have to say, okay, so if you know that I'm using a particular feature and I'm spending a lot of time, let's just say using a report, you really want to know what I'm doing after that. So I'm using that report and I'm dumping that report into Excel and running this other report manually. And of course, product managers search for this because it's another feature. But what's really happening is I take that summary data and I send it to this vendor over here, and I'm wiring in my ecosystem, right? And then this other thing happens. And then when everything kind of comes all the way back around, there's this benefit thing that's happening that I'm returning back to our organization. And maybe that gets expressed into hiring one less person or being able to juice revenues or profitability in some way. But you're trying to get a bead onto that. So if you just sat down and monitored the feature, you might mistakenly conclude, oh, this dashboard? Well, this company has, 20 dashboards. Let's meter the dashboards, because when he needs dashboard number 21, he's going to upgrade. He's not going to upgrade. He's just going to go without the 21st dashboard, and you're going to be not as sticky potentially as you could have been. So you can't stop at the use. That's the problem. You have to take it one step further and say, what does the use deliver?
Right. What value does it deliver? Now,
We call that, so you can call that hunting down the value chain.
Hunting down the value chain. So in hunting down the value chain, you use an example of one company with the 21st dashboard. I might envision that if I had the usage analytics in place and I could see what was happening in the product across multiple companies, then I can, in aggregate, start to understand first the usage of the feature, but then also value hunting, because I can see that it starts to show product fit to some degree or value delivery in this particular spot. Thinking about it, whether that makes it more sticky for retention, less churn, or go to market, I now have a better understanding of the value that I'm creating through the 20 dashboards, and what people are using it for. It sounds like that what you're saying is that the analytics and insights that you can get from usage could be a better metric than going to the client and asking them to try to verbalize value and verbalize pricing.
Yeah, and what you can do is you can use those analytics to trigger those conversations with those customers for very deep insights. So you can say, well, let's talk about the dashboard. Now, you know that they're using it a ton, right? How is it that you're using it? Are you exporting it in any way? What's happening after the fact? Can you walk me through that? Like all those kinds of discoveries, I believe is what product management should be doing. But what they tend to do is they stop before they complete the circuit that says, okay, well, once you accomplished all that, Chuck, like then when that happened, like, you want to tie it back to something financial or something that is returning a material benefit back. That is what we would call a value driver. So what we're doing is we're trying to perform a job, we're trying to complete something, and maybe that's delivered through 2 features and a service for now. Of course, is going to change later, and maintaining that enumerated list of that value is the input that you need in order to then step back and go, okay, if I want to capture all this value, see, most product managers don't have a complete view of this. They're just going to have a partial view in it. And the majority of the time, it's not even enumerated anywhere inside the company. It's kind of tribal knowledge. And then it makes it like ridiculous to expect a salesperson to like defend value when they don't even have a list of the value drivers. Like I don't have a complete list of what, I have a complete list of features, but that's not really, we're missing a layer that says, well, what's all the value that we're, the things that, the capabilities that we're enabling. When we get all those inputs in, then we can step back and answer the question. And I think when I say step back, you don't want to just step back with the arbitrary product window that we put around these boundaries, because customers buy a solution and a solution can have multiple products. And that's the step back that nobody does. It's like I had product number 1 2 years ago. I had product number 2. I'm launching a new product line. The box goes around product number 2. We step back and look at product 2. We monetize it. But now, like, are we double dipping? Are we taking value from product 1 and product 2 that are being used together? And 9 times out of 10, we are. And then does this really make sense with product number 1's pricing strategy and product number 2's pricing strategy combined? And it turns out that when you clash products on very different pricing strategies, there are some real mathematical effects that get really weird. Like, this is an actual example. You can buy 2 products together where when you jam a huge amount of volume into product 2, you will calculate a lower discount that a customer might earn, which is super weird, right? Like, you would think if I'm going to put more volume in product 2, I would earn a better discount. But I can tell you time and time again, when you don't step back and look at the 2 products and the products clash, meaning like now we're pricing product 1 and pricing 2 on their independent strategies, and really what's happening is the customer has bought 2 products now. It's bizarre. It's just weird stuff happens. And of course, when weird stuff happens, what does the salesperson do? The salesperson is going to like, that doesn't work. So I'm definitely not going to like go by that playbook. I'm going to create my own playbook over here. And then they get whacked on the head with, well, you guys are over discounting. But I don't think that's over discounting. I think that's a broken model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's completely understand there can be a lot of complexity with product 1 and product 2. I feel like even as new features are added to an existing product, if you've had the simplicity in your model and you understand the value drivers, when you add new features, that puts pressure on that. When you have a second product that put pressure on it, I mean, is there guidance towards how to start thinking about that as, the feature factory kind of rolls out, more value? I mean, or you have a second product. I mean, how do you deal with the friction that's kind of created by either conflicting or complementary pricing models? Like you're back to introducing complexity. How do you keep it simple as you expand features and expand products?
You do have to make sacrifices, but sacrifices for simplicity, which we can get into. But I think that when you have two separate products that are launched at two different times, like we talked before, there's that tendency to just kind of treat product number two in a box. What you really want to do is to step back and, so I think a mental model is really helpful when you think about the on-prem days to the SaaS days. Okay, so when I say SaaS, I mean subscription billing, and the deployment model is in the cloud. When we were on-prem, that's where I started in the late 90s. We would bill you upfront for the software, so the risk was all yours. There was no shared risk. You're going to write a check for $500,000, and if you don't stick it in, you're going to get fired. And then we would bill you 18 to 22% annual maintenance, 22% if you're killing it, 18% if you weren't killing it so much. But there's this other thing that we did at the end of the year to stimulate more revenue. And that is that we would publish version 2, then version 3, version 4, version 5. And there was a revenue stream associated with upgrading. And not all clients would upgrade. That's what the deployment model component of SaaS helped solve. Right now, everybody's on the same code base. When we moved to SaaS, I believe that what happened was that revenue from the end of the year that got upgraded just went into the subscription stream. It just went into the subscription stream. Nobody thought about it, and it just, they're going to pay forever. It'll more than make up for itself. And I think you can have a mental model that says, well, pricing, more broadly, monetization, which pricing is a component of, licensing, packaging, and pricing. The mental model says that as we think about monetization, what we're really doing is we're inserting a gate check, like think of a dam or a levee or something that's kind of stopping the water of the new feature development. And then at that checkpoint, we're saying, is this really part of the original promise that we made, Chuck, here, that this was part of the maintenance and care and feeding and what I would consider, the traditional roadmap? Or have we been so aggressive on the roadmap that we're actually delivering more value? And these other things over here, they really should be monetized separately. And I, from my experience, will propose the hypothesis that the vast majority of companies do not have that gate check at all. And so what happens is we tend to give away a lot of value by giving, there's no other thing you can buy on the planet that gets better every single day or every single week, just keep getting more and more and more. And then you couple that with the friction of pricing not being a discipline. And I'm lucky if I do a price change once a year as a larger company. And many software companies aren't even updating their pricing, especially through the 2022 to 2023. So now we have static prices, better discounting behavior from the buyer. So I would argue the net prices are eroding, right? And then we have more and more value and investment in the product being added. And so my hypothesis, and I believe this is the right view of things, is that most products are being devalued. They're not even in stasis, right? They're just, we're plowing more and more money and we're just becoming less and less efficient in our ability to extract a net price from that list price anchor point. And we can see that in the data over the years. Every couple of years that goes on, just the inefficiency just keeps creeping in the model. It's one of the most inefficient, the amount of list price that is vaporized to get a net price. Like if I told you, you might have $100 million software company at list and their net revenues were like 22 million, you would be like, well, how can that be, right? That's not even, that's, welcome to the software industry. Yeah, that's just how it is, because nobody has ever treated software pricing as a discipline. It's like the lost, everybody thought it was a black art. And it used to be a black art. It used to be 80% art, 20% science. But now with sophisticated tools and modeling, it's 80% science, 20% art. You will always need a great pattern matcher. And I can never express enough of how after a decade plus under the belt, you just see things differently. But in the beginning, you need somebody's judgment, because if a product manager or somebody is doing this for the first time, 100% guaranteed you're going to make a mistake. It's just, right. I mean, I can't tell you how many mistakes I made setting our own pricing. I mean, I lost millions on that.
Exactly.
I can tell you a great story on that, by the way, Chuck.
About losing millions. I've got a story about losing millions as well. It pops back in my mind to my way here, right? But you make a great point there, because as a particularly like a product led SaaS, when they MVP and get their first product market fit, it probably was on a single pain point, 2 or 3 features. They probably did extract the value. It didn't erode too much, but as you start to layer on and it gets more complicated, it's diminishing just by the nature of it. Like it's a battle to be fought. And so as you do that, the expertise and knowledge of, how do you continue to extract or to create monetization as you have the value drivers, as that gets more common. It sounds invaluable, because the goal is not to be 100 million list and 22 net. I mean, that's right. That would be, I think, the opposite of what I wanted to achieve if I was trying to grow from 5 to 25 million. It's a lot of work to have to list 100 million just to get to the net 25. If I were more thoughtful about it, maybe I can list 50 to get to 25. I mean, that would.
And by the way, that's 100 million list to 22 net, and then you start the journey of deducting the actual income that came in to the profitability of the business model. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is not just a financial exercise. This is a key component to the strategy that you would put behind the growth of your company, your software company. It sounds like. So, Chris, there were so many things that we could have covered today, but this was incredible. So many insights. I appreciate you sharing it. I learned some things. Definitely. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up today? Just to
I think sure that if I was going to leave the audience with a thought, if you go back to that concentric circle where the customer was at the center, I view monetization where the software company and the customer are at the center, and striking the balance is the right way to do that. And outside in can be informative, but inside out, where you do enumerate your value and you do express an opinion on that value, and you do have a process that continues to validate and push, a pricing process that validates and pushes on that, is the only way that you're going to get paid fairly. And if you rely on the market's intel and the competitors' intel, you're inadvertently copying the competitor's blueprint of risk, and you're inadvertently falling into the trap that the customer really doesn't care about whether or not you get paid for value. So I think activating your own internal perspective as a software company would probably be the biggest lesson learned in my career, was just, you do really get what you command and ask for in the marketplace, but you got to get that enumerated. You got to get that listed out. You got to get the rationale in place so that you can start vetting and validating that. And that's, I think, really the trick, which means you have to learn the discipline, right? Or at least a part of the discipline.
Right. Yeah. And by learning that discipline, you're going to take some of that pressure off of sales and sales discounting at the last hour, which...
Well, you'll always have the execution challenge. But I think in a comp plan, I'm usually giving you rewards and recognition on numbers and quota. But just imagine what would happen if I was able to measure and reward your adherence to a scheduled net price. That's a game changer, because that's tying in profitability, right?
Right. And I like your now we're playing baseball. So for everybody out there that wants to play more baseball, Chris, how do they get a hold of you?
Softwarepricing.com.
All right. So thank you for your time today. Great insights. Appreciate it.
Happy.
Thanks for joining us.
Take care.